History, as you learned, it is missing entire chapters. Across 20 astonishing archaeological discoveries, we will uncover a secret global network that linked ancient civilizations long before recorded contact. You will gain a completely new understanding of human history, one where our ancestors crossed vast oceans and exchanged ideas we thought were impossible. How did cocaine from South America end up in Egyptian mummies, who carved a message in ancient Hebrew deep in the heart of Tennessee? These are not isolated puzzles, but pieces of a grander story. What do you believe is possible when we reconsider the past? For centuries, we were taught that the great civilizations of the world blossomed in isolation, each a lonely flower in its own distant garden. This is the core of the isolationist perspective, a view that has long dominated our history books. It paints a picture of ancient Egypt, the Maya, and the Shang dynasty of China as entirely separate experiments in human culture, developing their pyramids, their writing, and their astronomy without any outside influence. Yet a competing idea has persistently whispered from the edges of academia. This is the diffusionist theory, which suggests that seeds of knowledge, technology, and belief were carried across oceans by intrepid ancient mariners, connecting these seemingly separate worlds. Why has this notion of pre-columbian transoceanic contact been met with such fierce resistance? For many in mainstream scholarship, the lack of definitive written records from these voyages, combined with a deep-seated belief in the technological limits of ancient seafaring, made the idea seem fantastical. Accepting it would mean rewriting fundamental chapters of human history. But what happens when the artifacts themselves begin to speak, telling a story that the written records have missed? The tension between these two views is not just an academic debate. It is the very battleground upon which our understanding of the past is being reshaped. As we peel back the layers, the evidence that is slowly coming to light suggests our ancestors were far more connected and far more daring than we ever believed. Deep in the sweltering jungles of Mexico, the Olmec civilization erected monuments that stop modern observers in their tracks. They are the Colossal heads, 17 immense stone sculptures carved from single blocks of volcanic basalt. Each one is a portrait of an individual, and their features are unmistakable. These faces, with their broad noses, full lips, and sometimes even what appears to be a helmet, do not look like the artistic traditions of later Mesoamerican cultures. They bear a striking, almost undeniable resemblance to people of West Africa. This single observation shatters the quiet isolation of the ancient American narrative. How do we explain these faces gazing out from the verdant landscape, a world away from the continent they seem to depict? The debate ignited the moment the first of these heads was unearthed in the 19th century. Mainstream archaeology posits that these are portraits of local Olmec rulers, their features stylized or perhaps representative of the local population at that distant time. Yet the specificity is haunting. The artisans did not create generic human forms. They captured distinct physiological traits that align perfectly with African phenotypes. This was not a vague artistic choice. It was a deliberate recording of a specific kind of face. The mystery only deepens when you consider the sheer effort involved. These are not small trinkets. The largest of the heads weighs over 20 tons. The basalt was quarried from the Tuxtla Mountains, and somehow, without the wheel or draft animals, the Olmec transported these gargantuan stones nearly 100 kilometers through rugged, river-crossed terrain. This feat of engineering speaks of a highly organized and powerful society, one certainly capable of interacting with foreign visitors. Could those visitors have been skilled sailors from across the Atlantic? The heads stand as silent, monumental witnesses, their stony gaze challenging us to reconsider who the Olmec were and who they might have met. But the stone faces of the Olmec are not the only evidence pointing to an ancient global network. A different kind of witness was found in the dry, preserving sands of Egypt, one that offered a chemical clue so startling it seemed to defy all logic. In the late 20th century, a team of German scientists made a discovery while analyzing the tissues of ancient Egyptian mummies that would ignite a firestorm of controversy. They found traces of two specific substances, nicotine and cocaine, locked within the hair, skin, and bones of individuals who had died millennia before Christopher Columbus was even born. This was a biochemical bombshell. How could these compounds, derived from plants that evolved exclusively in the Americas, be present inside the bodies of Egyptian nobles and pharaohs? The implications were staggering. It suggested a transoceanic exchange of goods, or at the very least of knowledge, that our historical timelines claimed was impossible. The scientific community reacted with predictable and intense skepticism. The initial assumption was one of contamination. Perhaps the mummies had been handled by modern researchers who smoked cigarettes, or maybe the museum display cases were to blame. Yet the testing protocols were rigorous, and subsequent analyses on multiple mummies from different museum collections kept yielding the same impossible results. The substances were embedded deep within the tissues, not just sitting on the surface, indicating they were consumed during the person's lifetime. If contamination was not the answer, then what was? The most direct explanation is also the most revolutionary. Ancient Egyptian mariners, or perhaps intermediaries in a vast trade network, somehow acquired these plants from across the Atlantic. Imagine the scene: a ship from the Nile Delta or a trading partner from another ancient culture, making the perilous journey and returning with exotic goods that would become the prized possessions of the elite. Others proposed different routes, perhaps overland through Asia and then by sea, though this seems equally daunting. There is even a fringe theory that these plants, like coca and tobacco, once grew in the Old World but went extinct there, though no fossil evidence has ever been found to support this. The cocaine and nicotine residues stand as one of the most direct and personal pieces of evidence we have. Unlike a stone head that can be debated as artistic style, this is forensic science. It tells us what these ancient individuals actually ingested. This is not a story carved in stone, but one written in the very chemistry of their bodies, a silent testament to a connection that history has yet to fully explain. Far from the deserts of Egypt, a different kind of mystery was quietly unearthed from the soil of North America. In the late 19th century, a team of researchers excavating a Native American burial mound in Bat Creek, Tennessee, discovered a small, inscribed stone tucked beside the skeletons. At first glance, it seemed like just another curious rock, but the markings on its surface were anything but ordinary. They appeared to be an ancient script, one that looked utterly out of place in the heart of Appalachia. The stone was set aside for decades, a puzzle waiting for someone to decipher its code. When a scholar finally took a closer look in the 1970s, he made a stunning claim. The inscription, he argued, was not a random collection of scratches. It was Paleo-Hebrew, a script used in the Middle East around 3,000 years ago. His translation of the 5 characters was even more provocative for the Jews. If he was correct, this humble stone was a monumental declaration, evidence of a Semitic presence in ancient America centuries before European contact. The academic world reacted with immediate and forceful opposition. The established narrative of pre-Columbian America had no room for Mediterranean travelers. Critics were quick to propose a far more convenient explanation, an elaborate hoax. They pointed to the archaeologist who originally found the stone, John Emmett, suggesting he might have carved and planted it himself, perhaps to please his employer or to secure his precarious job. The inscription, they argued, bore a suspicious resemblance to a phrase found in a popular 19th century Masonic reference book, a book Emmett could have accessed. This became the official stance, a comfortable way to dismiss a deeply uncomfortable artifact. Yet, the case was far from closed. Later examinations using modern technology revealed details that the hoax theory struggled to explain. High-resolution imaging showed that a crust of patina, a natural weathering film that takes centuries to form, was present deep within the carved grooves of the letters. This suggested the inscription was ancient, not a modern addition. How could a forger in the 1880s have replicated the slow, natural chemical processes of 1,000 years? The Bat Creek stone sits at the very center of a storm, a perfect example of the struggle between a tidy historical record and a messy, anomalous find. Is it definitive proof of Hebrew explorers in Tennessee? Not necessarily, but it forces a difficult question. Is it more likely that a desperate field worker executed a nearly flawless forgery that would fool modern scientific analysis, or that our understanding of ancient human movement is fundamentally incomplete? This small stone carries the weight of a vast possibility. It whispers of Phoenician traders known to be the greatest sailors of the ancient world, who used a similar script. Could a ship from the court of King Solomon have been blown wildly off course, its survivors making landfall and integrating with the local population? The Bat Creek stone does not offer easy answers, but it stands as a powerful symbol. It represents every artifact that challenges our textbooks, every piece of evidence that begs us to look deeper and question the stories we think we know. A single Norse coin, weathered and out of place, was unearthed from a Native American shell midden on the coast of Maine. Known as the Maine penny, this small piece of silver currency dates to the reign of King Olaf Kyrre of Norway in the 11th century. Its discovery alone is a tantalizing clue, suggesting that Norse explorers, likely from their settlements in Greenland or Newfoundland, traded directly with indigenous peoples along the North American coast. But this is just one coin. The plot thickens considerably when we look further south, where other metallic fragments tell an even older story. Along the beaches of Venezuela and buried in the soil of New England, Roman coins have been found. These are not replicas or modern losses, but authenticated bronze and silver pieces from the era of the Caesars. One particularly compelling example is a bronze coin of the Emperor Constantine the Great, discovered on an island off the Venezuelan coast. How does a coin minted in the 4th century at the height of the Roman Empire end up half a world away, centuries before Columbus set sail? The first challenge is authentication. Experts scrutinize the metal composition, the style of the strike, and the patina, that thin layer of corrosion that forms over centuries. A modern forgery or a coin dropped by a modern collector will lack the specific chemical signature of age. When these coins pass such tests, the mystery becomes undeniable. So how did they cross the Atlantic? One compelling theory points to shipwrecks. A Roman trading vessel, perhaps a grain ship from North Africa, could have been caught in a storm and dragged by the powerful currents of the Atlantic Gyre, a vast circulating system of ocean currents. A disabled ship, its crew helpless, could have been carried across the ocean over weeks or months, eventually washing ashore in the New World. A handful of survivors might have integrated with local tribes, their precious coins slowly dispersing through trade or simply lost to time. Another possibility involves not a single epic voyage, but a long and complex daisy chain of trade. A Roman coin could have traveled north into Scandinavia, been acquired by a Viking trader, and then been brought westward to Vinland, eventually passing from hand to hand through indigenous trade networks that span the continent. Each coin is a tiny, metallic whisper from a past we are only beginning to hear. They are too few to suggest a sustained Roman colony, but they are too credible to be dismissed as mere accidents. They force us to ask a profound question. If a single Roman ship, just one, ever made that unintended journey, what other stories of chance encounters and forgotten voyages lie buried, waiting for a turn of the archaeologist's trowel? A single crop can carry the story of an entire ocean crossing within its genetic code. The sweet potato, a staple food across the islands of Polynesia for centuries, holds precisely this kind of botanical secret. For generations, the presence of this hearty root vegetable, known there as the kumara, was a quiet puzzle. How could a plant native to the highlands of South America have become so deeply woven into the culture and cuisine of remote Pacific islands, long before any European explorers' maps even hinted at a connection? The answer lies not in stone or coin, but in the plant's very DNA. Modern genetic sequencing has delivered a definitive verdict. The Polynesian kumara is genetically identical to the sweet potato of the Andes. This is not a case of parallel evolution or a similar plant with a different origin. It is the exact same species, a fact that shatters the idea of two separate worlds. The most logical conclusion is as breathtaking as it is simple. Ancient Polynesian voyagers, the greatest open ocean explorers the world has ever known, somehow reached the western coast of South America. They encountered this new, nutritious tuber, and recognizing its value, they brought it back with them on their epic return journey across thousands of miles of open sea. Consider the sheer scale of this probable voyage. The Polynesians did not sail blindly. They were master navigators, reading the stars, the swells of the ocean, the flight paths of birds, and the composition of clouds to find distant islands. Their double-hulled canoes were massive, capable of carrying families, livestock, and provisions for voyages that could last for weeks. To reach South America from their easternmost outposts like Easter Island would have meant traversing a vast, empty expanse of the Pacific. This was not a journey for the timid. It was a deliberate act of exploration and acquisition. The successful transfer of the kumara speaks volumes. It was not just a one-time, accidental encounter where a single plant was carried back. For the sweet potato to become an established, named, and vital crop across so many Polynesian islands, it had to have been a deliberate, replicated exchange. This suggests multiple voyages, or at the very least, a successful return trip where the plant was carefully cultivated, and its value so appreciated that it was shared widely across the seafaring network. The kumara did not just float across the ocean on its own. It was carried by people, a living, breathing piece of evidence that these two distant cultures, the mountain civilizations of the Andes and the island civilizations of the Pacific, once met. This botanical bridge forces us to rewrite the map of the ancient world, filling the blue void of the Pacific with the routes of incredible journeys, and replacing isolation with a story of connection, one sweet potato at a time. While a single coin hints at trade, a massive stone slab tells a far more ambitious story. Deep in the forests of Minnesota in 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman was clearing his land when his roots tangled around a most unexpected obstacle. It was a flat, gray stone weighing over 200 pounds, and it was covered in strange, angular markings. When scholars were finally called to examine it, they were astounded. The markings were runes, an ancient Scandinavian alphabet. The inscription, if genuine, was a historical thunderclap. It told of a party of 8 Goths or Swedes and 22 Norwegians on an exploration journey from Vinland. Most startlingly, it recorded a tragic event. The group returned to their camp only to find 10 men red with blood and dead. the stone was dated 1362. This was the Kensington Runestone, and its message was clear. Norsemen, it claimed, had ventured deep into the heart of North America, over 1,000 miles from the coast, a full 130 years after the Vikings abandoned their settlement at El Ants Ox Meadows. The inscription was a detailed, first-person account of a desperate situation, a ghost story carved in stone. The immediate reaction from the academic establishment was one of outright dismissal. It had to be a hoax, a clever forgery by a homesick Scandinavian farmer with too much time on his hands. The critics launched a fierce attack on the linguistics. They argued that the runic forms and the language used were an inconsistent mix, containing elements that seemed modern or drawn from different time periods. It was, they declared, the work of an amateur who had consulted available 19th century books on runes, making mistakes a genuine medieval carver would never have made. The stone was branded a fraud and cast into scholarly darkness for decades, but the stone itself was not finished speaking. In the late 20th century, new geological evidence emerged that the hoax theory could not easily explain. Scientists performed a meticulous analysis of the stone's weathering. They found that the carved inscription was not fresh. A thick layer of mineral deposits, a patina that takes centuries to form, had accumulated deep within the grooves of every single rune. This was not something a farmer with a chisel in the 1890s could have faked. The weathering pattern was consistent with the stone having been carved and then lying face down in the soil for hundreds of years, exactly as Oman had found it. This physical evidence forced a reluctant re-examination of the linguistic arguments. Newer studies suggested that the language on the stone, once mocked as gibberish, might actually reflect a specific medieval Scandinavian dialect, one used by traders and explorers, not the formal language of royal inscriptions. The very inconsistencies that were once proof of a forgery were now being reinterpreted as evidence of a genuine, hastily carved message by a group of frightened men far from home. The Kensington Runestone stands as a perfect storm of archaeological controversy. It pits a seemingly unbelievable story against stubborn physical evidence. Could a group of Norse explorers have canoed down the Great Lakes and rivers, pushing that far inland? Or is this the most elaborate and enduring hoax in American history? The stone does not yield its secrets easily, but its very existence challenges the neat borders we have drawn on the map of the past, suggesting that the Viking spirit of exploration may have reached much further into the wilderness than we ever dared to believe. The cold Pacific waters off the California coast guard a secret of stone. For decades, fishermen and researchers have been pulling up strangely shaped rocks from the seabed, heavy objects that do not belong there naturally. These are not ordinary stones. They are large, donut-shaped anchors with central holes, identical in design to those used for centuries by massive Chinese trading vessels known as junks. Their presence on the seafloor, far from any known Asian shipwreck, ignites a profound question. What were Chinese anchors doing in the Americas long before the age of European exploration? The design is the first compelling clue. These are not simple weights. They are sophisticated, purpose-built maritime tools, carefully carved from a specific type of rock called dolomite, a stone that is not native to the California coastline. Geological analysis confirmed the startling truth. The stone used to make these anchors originated in China. This means the anchors were not local imitations. They were brought across the entire Pacific Ocean. The most tantalizing theory points directly to one of history's greatest mariners, the Chinese Admiral Zheng He. In the early 15th century, Zheng He commanded a treasure fleet of colossal proportions. His largest ships were over 400 feet long, dwarfing the tiny vessels Columbus would use nearly a century later. His 7 epic voyages, well documented in Chinese records, stretched across the Indian Ocean, reaching the coast of Africa. But what if his fleet, or a part of it, went even further? What if they crossed the Pacific? Official histories do not record such a voyage, but the anchors suggest a possibility that written records may have missed. Perhaps a squadron was sent east on an exploratory mission, or maybe a ship was blown far off course by a typhoon. The anchors found off California could be the physical remnants of that lost expedition, dropped in a desperate attempt to ride out a storm or to make repairs in a sheltered cove. Skeptics offer a more mundane explanation. They propose the anchors could be from a much later period, perhaps from Chinese fishing boats working the rich waters off California in the 19th century. Yet this theory falters when examined closely. The design of the recovered anchors is ancient, not modern. Furthermore, 19th century Chinese fishing junks were not large, deep-sea vessels capable of carrying multi-ton stone anchors across an ocean. They were smaller coastal boats. The sheer weight and archaic style of these stones point to a much earlier and far more significant origin. Imagine the scene for a moment. A gigantic Chinese junk, its red sails billowing, appearing off the coast of what we now call California. The crew, weary from a voyage of unimaginable length, would have encountered a world utterly new to them. They might have traded goods with local tribes, exchanged knowledge, or simply taken on fresh water before attempting the perilous return journey. Their story, if it happened, was lost. But the anchors remained silent sentinels on the ocean floor, waiting for centuries to be found. They stand as a monumental challenge to our timeline, suggesting that the threads of global connection may have been spun from the east, not the west. Standing in a quiet Newport Park, a circular tower of rough stone rises against the New England sky. Its 8 arches support a cylindrical structure that looks both ancient and utterly out of place. This is the Newport Tower, and for over 3 centuries it has been the center of a historical debate with no clear resolution. Is this a humble colonial mill from the 1600s, or is it a silent, crumbling relic of a Norse presence in America, built 500 years earlier? The architecture itself is the first and most compelling piece of evidence. Proponents of the Norse theory point directly to its striking resemblance to medieval round churches found in Scandinavia, particularly those from the 12th century. The design, with its central supporting column and distinctive arched openings, is a near-mirror image of structures like the round church at Orfair in Scotland, a region heavily influenced by Norse settlers. They argue that the tower's alignment is not random. Certain windows and arches are positioned to capture the sunrise on specific solstice days, a sophisticated astronomical feature more typical of Norse sacred architecture than a simple colonial windmill. The official historical record, however, tells a different story. Documents from the colonial era refer to the tower as Governor Benedict Arnold's stone-built windmill, dating its construction to the mid-1700s. This seems like a straightforward explanation, yet even this is not without its complications. Why would a colonial governor invest such tremendous effort in a stone mill when wood was plentiful and far easier to build with? And why choose this peculiar, archaic design, so different from the practical, square windmills that were common throughout New England at the time? The debate often hinges on the mortar holding the stones together. Scientific analysis has dated the mortar to the colonial period, a finding that seems to slam the door on a Viking origin. But here the mystery deepens. Skeptics of the colonial theory propose a different scenario. What if the Norsemen did build the original tower, and centuries later, colonial settlers, finding the structure still standing, simply repaired it using fresh mortar for their own use? This would perfectly explain the modern dating of the mortar while preserving the possibility of a far older core structure. The tower's true story is locked within its stones, a puzzle without a key. It embodies the fundamental challenge of archaeology, where a single piece of evidence can be interpreted in two completely different ways depending on the story you want to tell. Walking around its base, you are caught between two worlds. One is a world of English colonists grinding grain for their new settlement. The other is a far more daring world, one of Norse explorers venturing south from their known settlements, building a beacon, a church, or an outpost on a distant and unknown shore. The Newport Tower does not give up its secrets easily. It simply stands, a permanent question mark in stone, reminding us that some of history's greatest mysteries are not hidden in distant jungles, but waiting in plain sight. The story of the Paraiba Inscription is a cautionary tale wrapped in a historical enigma. In 1872, a landowner in Brazil's Paraiba state came forward with a remarkable claim. Workers quarrying stone on his property had uncovered a broken slab bearing a strange text. When a local scholar managed to copy and translate the inscription, its message was earth-shattering. It declared in an ancient Semitic script that a group of Phoenician sailors had landed on these shores. The text was specific and haunting. It stated they were 10 Sidonians, sons of Canaan, and that they had been separated from their companions, offering a plea to the gods for their safe return. Here was a first-person account, seemingly carved by a lost Phoenician explorer himself, placing these master sailors of the Mediterranean on the coast of Brazil centuries before the Common Era. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the physical stone vanished. It was never seen again, leaving behind only copies of the inscription and a storm of doubt. The academic world, already skeptical of such claims, pounced on the story's many vulnerabilities. The landowner had a history of involvement with dubious artifacts, and the circumstances of the discovery were murky at best. Without the original stone to analyze, the entire story could be easily dismissed as an elaborate 19th century hoax, a forgery designed for fame or notoriety. The case seemed closed for nearly a century, but the inscription refused to die. In the 1960s, a prominent Semitic scholar, Dr. Cyrus Gordon, took a fresh look at the copied text. His conclusion sent shockwaves through the small community of researchers who followed these anomalies. He argued that the language and grammar used were not a clumsy modern fake. They contained archaic Phoenician forms and subtle linguistic nuances that were completely unknown to 19th century forgers. The knowledge required to create such a perfect, scholarly hoax simply did not exist at the time the stone was found. This was not the end of the debate, however. Other linguists fiercely challenged Gordon's assessment. They pointed to potential anachronisms and argued that a clever forger could have pieced together phrases from known inscriptions available in books of the era. The debate rages on precisely because the original artifact is gone. We are left with a ghost of evidence, a story without its star witness. This forces a difficult but essential question. What would it truly take to prove such an extraordinary claim? A single inscribed stone, even if it were still here, might never be enough to overturn our history books. We would need a settlement, pottery, tools, or burials, a full archaeological context that places the Phoenicians undeniably on that soil. The Paraiba inscription, real or not, serves a higher purpose. It starkly illustrates the immense burden of proof required to rewrite history and highlights the fragile nature of evidence itself. It is a phantom that haunts the edges of our understanding, a compelling story that may forever linger in the space between a daring truth and an ingenious deception. Deep in the woods of Massachusetts, a stone passageway descends into the earth, leading to a chamber that should not exist. This is the Upton Chamber, a perfectly constructed subterranean room built with a technique known as corbelling. The stones are stacked in ever-tightening circles, each layer slightly overlapping the one below until the space above is completely enclosed without any need for a keystone. It is a masterpiece of ancient engineering, and it is an architectural twin to the beehive tombs found scattered across the Irish and Scottish countryside, structures dating back thousands of years. The resemblance is so precise, so technically specific, that it cannot be dismissed as a coincidence. So who built this old-world structure in the heart of New England, and when? The most romantic and plausible theory points to a group of legendary travelers, the Culdee monks from Ireland. These devout explorers were said to have sailed into the North Atlantic in their small, leather-hulled curraghs, seeking solitude and a life of prayer far from the world. Historical accounts like the voyage of St. Brendan speak of their incredible journeys. Could a group of these monks, having heard tales of a distant land to the west, have made the perilous crossing? The Upton Chamber would have been the perfect sanctuary for them, a place of meditation and refuge built in the exact style they knew from home. Its underground nature provided insulation from the harsh New England winters and a profound sense of seclusion. The official explanation is far more mundane. It is often labeled a colonial root cellar, a practical storage space built by 17th century settlers. Yet this explanation feels deeply unsatisfying. Why would colonists who built everything from their homes to their churches from readily available timber go to the immense and unnecessary labor of quarrying and precisely shaping hundreds of stones to create a permanent, sophisticated structure using a complex, archaic building method they never employed anywhere else? A simple dugout cellar lined with wood would have been infinitely easier. The chamber's design is not just functional, it is culturally specific. It speaks of a building tradition that was ancient long before the first English colonists arrived. Walking into the cool, dark silence of the Upton Chamber is a disorienting experience. You are standing in a piece of Celtic Europe, transported across an ocean and buried in American soil. It forces a question that echoes far beyond this single site. If one such chamber exists, how many others have been lost, dismantled for their stone by farmers who never knew what they were destroying? This enigmatic stone room is a profound reminder that the landscape around us may hold secrets we are only beginning to understand, hidden in plain sight. A terracotta head with the classic features of a Roman patrician stares back from the soil of Mexico. This is the Tecáxic-Calixtlahuaca head, discovered deep within a burial that was sealed centuries before any Spanish ship sighted the New World. Its beard, its hairstyle, the very technique of its sculpting, all are alien to Mesoamerican art. This is not a vague resemblance. Stylistic analysis pins it firmly to the Roman world of the 2nd century, a small, portable piece of a Mediterranean villa somehow transported to an ancient Mexican grave. The context of its discovery is what makes this artifact so difficult to dismiss. It was not found on the surface or in a mixed layer of soil. Archaeologists uncovered it within a sealed archaeological stratum, a clear, undisturbed layer of earth that dates the burial to sometime between the 12th and 14th centuries. This stratigraphy is the bedrock of archaeological dating. It means the head was placed there by people for whom the pyramids of Teotihuacan were already ancient history, long before Columbus was even a dream in Europe's future. So how does a Roman artifact end up in a sealed pre-Columbian grave? The head is a classic example of an OOP art, an out-of-place artifact. It fits no conventional model. The immediate reaction from mainstream scholarship was to question the find. Perhaps it was a later intrusion, a practical joke by a modern excavator. or even a stray object from a Spanish collector that somehow worked its way down into an older layer. Yet the documented excavation records and the integrity of the burial site itself argue against such convenient explanations. The head was found alongside authentic local offerings, buried with reverence. If we accept the stratigraphy as genuine, we are left with a handful of breathtaking possibilities. Could a Roman ship have been swept across the Atlantic, a single vessel carrying a few survivors who integrated into local society, their few precious belongings eventually becoming sacred heirlooms? Or does the head point to a more complex, interwoven trade network, where objects pass through countless hands across vast distances, a tiny terracotta head moving from the Roman world through Asia, across the Bering Strait, and down the entire American continent? The Tekaxitlahuaca head offers no easy answers. It simply sits in silent defiance, a small, unassuming object that carries the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. It proves that some of the most profound challenges to history are not massive stone monuments, but small, stubborn outliers that refuse to fit into the boxes we have built for them. Across the Pacific, another living clue was quietly buried in the Chilean earth. At a site called El Arenal, archaeologists unearthed a collection of seemingly ordinary chicken bones. But these were no ordinary remains. Radiocarbon dating placed them firmly in the 14th century, a full 100 years before the first Spanish conquistadors set foot in South America. This simple fact transformed the bones into a historical anomaly. How could a species native to Southeast Asia, the chicken, be present in the Americas before European contact? The answer was locked within the bones themselves. Advanced DNA analysis provided the definitive link, revealing a genetic signature that did not match European or Asian breeds. These ancient Chilean chickens were a direct match for Polynesian varieties. This was not a case of a species drifting on a log. This was a deliberate, successful transfer. Imagine the journey required to bring live chickens across thousands of miles of open ocean. The Polynesians would have had to carry the birds in their large, double-hulled voyaging canoes, providing them with food and water for a voyage that could last for weeks. This was not a trivial undertaking. It meant these explorers were not just sightseers, they were colonizers, carrying the essentials for establishing a new life, including a sustainable source of food. The chicken is a biological footprint, a tangible piece of evidence that cannot be debated as art or dismissed as a hoax. It proves that a Polynesian vessel, crewed by skilled navigators, not only reached the Americas but made landfall, interacted with local populations, and left behind a living legacy that would endure for centuries. This discovery connects the dots across the vast Pacific, turning the ocean from a barrier into a highway, and proving that the most enduring connections are often written not in stone, but in bone and blood. A single Norse coin, weathered and out of place, was unearthed from a Native American shell midden on the coast of Maine. Known as the Maine penny, this small piece of silver currency dates to the reign of King Olaf Kyrre of Norway in the 11th century. Its discovery alone is a tantalizing clue, suggesting that Norse explorers, likely from their settlements in Greenland or Newfoundland, traded directly with indigenous peoples along the North American coast. But this is just one coin. The plot thickens considerably when we look further south, where other metallic fragments tell an even older story. Along the beaches of Venezuela and buried in the soil of New England, Roman coins have been found. These are not replicas or modern losses, but authenticated bronze and silver pieces from the era of the Caesars. One particularly compelling example is a bronze coin of the Emperor Constantine the Great, discovered on an island off the Venezuelan coast. How does a coin minted in the 4th century at the height of the Roman Empire end up half a world away, centuries before Columbus set sail. The first challenge is authentication. Experts scrutinize the metal composition, the style of the strike, and the patina, that thin layer of corrosion that forms over centuries. A modern forgery or a coin dropped by a modern collector will lack the specific chemical signature of age. When these coins pass such tests, the mystery becomes undeniable. So how did they cross the Atlantic? One compelling theory points to shipwrecks. A Roman trading vessel, perhaps a grain ship from North Africa, could have been caught in a storm and dragged by the powerful currents of the Atlantic Gyre, a vast circulating system of ocean currents. A disabled ship, its crew helpless, could have been carried across the ocean over weeks or months, eventually washing ashore in the New World. A handful of survivors might have integrated with local tribes, their precious coins slowly dispersing through trade or simply lost to time. Another possibility involves not a single epic voyage, but a long and complex daisy chain of trade. A Roman coin could have traveled north into Scandinavia, been acquired by a Viking trader, and then been brought westward to Vinland, eventually passing from hand to hand through indigenous trade networks that span the continent. Each coin is a tiny, metallic whisper from a past we are only beginning to hear. They are too few to suggest a sustained Roman colony, but they are too credible to be dismissed as mere accidents. They force us to ask a profound question. If a single Roman ship, just one, ever made that unintended journey, what other stories of chance encounters and forgotten voyages lie buried, waiting for a turn of the archaeologist's trowel? The colossal stones of Baalbek defy simple explanation. In Lebanon, the ruins of a Roman temple rest upon a foundation of blocks so immense they seem the work of giants. The largest of these, the famed stone of the pregnant woman, weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. That is heavier than a fully loaded passenger jet. How a civilization without modern machinery quarried, shaped, and lifted these behemoths remains one of history's most enduring puzzles. But the mystery does not belong to Lebanon alone. Look across the world to the highlands of Peru, to the fortress of Sacsayhuaman. Here, the Inca built walls from stones that match Baalbek in their breathtaking scale and impossible precision. Individual blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, are cut with such exacting angles that they fit together without a sliver of space for a razor blade. The stonework is a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, locked together so perfectly that these walls have withstood centuries of earthquakes that have flattened modern cities. The parallels are too striking to ignore. Two cultures separated by an ocean and thousands of years, both chose to build with cyclopean stones, and both mastered a technique of polygonal masonry where irregular blocks interlock with uncanny, seismic-resistant perfection. Could this be a case of independent invention, a universal solution to the problem of building for eternity? Or does it point to something far more profound, the ghost of a shared architectural idea that traveled across the globe? The sheer impracticality of this method argues against simple coincidence. Moving a 1,000-ton block is not a logical first choice for any builder. It is an act of supreme confidence or perhaps adherence to a forgotten tradition. The style itself becomes a kind of signature, a structural language that speaks of a deep understanding of stone, physics, and longevity. If these techniques were developed in isolation, why do we not see a gradual evolution, a trial and error of smaller stones leading to these monsters? At both Baalbek and Sacsayhuaman, the largest stones are often at the very bottom, the foundational layer, as if the builders possessed this supreme skill from the very beginning. This pattern suggests the tantalizing possibility of a common source, a lost school of engineering whose masters traversed the ancient world, leaving behind a legacy in stone that we can barely replicate today. Were they the survivors of a forgotten civilization, or a guild of itinerant builders who carried this secret knowledge from continent to continent? The walls themselves offer no written records, only a silent, formidable testament to a connected past that we are only now beginning to read. Sitting in a small Bolivian museum is a ceramic bowl that should not exist. Known as the Fuente Magna, this vessel was discovered near Lake Titicaca, and its surface is etched with a script that has sent shockwaves through the world of archaeology. The inscriptions are not just simple decorations. To the trained eye, they bear a startling resemblance to Proto-Sumerian cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing system that emerged in ancient Mesopotamia over 5,000 years ago. How could a script from the very cradle of civilization, a world away in the Middle East, appear on an artifact from the high Andes? The implications are staggering, pointing to a transoceanic connection that defies our entire understanding of the ancient world. The bowl itself is the center of the storm. It is a large, beautifully crafted piece of pottery, and the writing covers both its interior and exterior. Some researchers have painstakingly translated the symbols, suggesting they are a mix of Proto-Sumerian and a later, local hieroglyphic script. The translations are fragmentary but compelling, hinting at dedications to a goddess, perhaps Nia, a deity associated with creation and water. If this interpretation is correct, it would mean that a Mesopotamian presence, or at the very least their profound cultural influence, reached South America in the distant past. The arguments against its authenticity are fierce and predictable. Skeptics immediately cry hoax, suggesting the bowl is a modern forgery designed to create a sensation. They question the provenance, the exact circumstances of its discovery in the 1950s, and point to the lack of any other similar artifacts found in the region. How could such a monumental piece of evidence appear in isolation, they ask, without any supporting context like tools, settlements, or other inscribed objects? This is the classic burden of proof demanded of any out-of-place artifact. Yet the arguments in its favor are equally powerful. The script itself is the key. The specific forms of the cuneiform on the Fuente Magna are not the well-known classic script from the time of Hammurabi. They are from an earlier, more archaic period, a style of writing that was not widely understood or published at the time the bowl was found. A forger in the mid-20th century would have had incredibly limited resources to replicate such an obscure and ancient script with such apparent accuracy. The linguistic analysis suggests a level of knowledge that simply was not available to a potential hoaxer. Imagine for a moment the journey this bowl represents. Could a ship from the Persian Gulf carrying traders or explorers have been swept around the southern tip of Africa and then across the Atlantic, eventually making landfall on the coast of South America? From there, they could have traveled inland, following rivers up into the Altiplano, the high plateau surrounding Lake Titicaca. This was a region that would later give rise to the mighty Tiwanaku culture, a civilization known for its own monumental architecture and sophisticated society. Did these Mesopotamian visitors share knowledge, intermarry, and leave behind this single, sacred object as a testament to their presence? The Fuente Magna bowl does not offer easy answers. It stands as one of the most controversial and potentially revolutionary artifacts ever discovered. It forces us to confront a single, profound question. Is it more likely that our entire model of ancient human history is incomplete, or that an unknown forger possessed a near-miraculous understanding of a 5,000-year-old script? This humble piece of pottery holds within its curves the power to connect two worlds, suggesting that the story of civilization is not a series of isolated events, but a single, interconnected tapestry whose threads we are only just beginning to trace. From the high Andes comes a collection of stones that challenge the very timeline of life on Earth. The Ica Stones of Peru are thousands of andesite rocks, each meticulously carved with scenes that should not exist. They depict humans living alongside dinosaurs like Triceratops and Stegosaurus, performing complex medical surgeries such as blood transfusions and cesarean sections, and studying celestial charts and maps of unknown continents. If these stones are authentic, they are not merely artifacts, they are a library from a forgotten age, one that possessed knowledge we thought was exclusively modern. The central mystery is a battle between two irreconcilable possibilities. Are these the clever forgeries of local farmers, or the sacred records of a lost civilization with an understanding of the world that predates our own by millions of years? The story of their modern discovery is shrouded in controversy. A local physician, Dr. Javier Cabrera, became the stone's most prominent collector and proponent in the 1960s, amassing a collection of over 15,000 pieces. He argued that an advanced civilization, which he called the Glyptolithic man, created them as an encoded history before a global cataclysm wiped them out. The stones themselves tell a sweeping narrative, showing humans using telescopes, domesticating dinosaurs, and performing heart transplants. This is a history so radical, it would force us to rewrite every textbook on paleontology and human evolution. The immediate and overwhelming response from mainstream science was to declare the entire collection an elaborate hoax. Skeptics pointed to the farmers who initially sold the stones to tourists, men who eventually admitted, under pressure, to carving the rocks themselves. They used simple tools like dental drills and then aged the stones by baking them in cow dung to create a false patina. This confession seemed to slam the door shut on the mystery. It was a tidy explanation, a story of poverty and ingenuity exploiting the desire for the sensational. Yet the case is not so easily closed. Why would the farmers create such a vast and thematically consistent library, one that required a deep, if fanciful, understanding of paleontology and advanced medicine? The sheer volume of the collection suggests a coordinated effort far beyond a simple scam. Furthermore, some stones were reportedly found in deep underground ossuaries, burial chambers that were sealed for centuries, contexts that would be difficult for a modern forger to access. The most compelling argument against a wholesale dismissal is the stone itself. Andesite is an exceptionally hard rock, far tougher than the basalt used for the Olmec heads. To carve it with the fine details seen on the Ica stones would require modern, hardened steel tools, not the simple implements available to impoverished farmers. Could they have secretly acquired such advanced tools, and if so, why devote countless hours to creating a hoax of such monumental scale when simpler fakes would suffice? The Ica stones force us to confront the uncomfortable limits of our knowledge. They represent the ultimate historical paradox, an artifact that is simultaneously too incredible to believe and too complex to easily dismiss. Whether they are the work of a cunning 20th century artist or the legacy of a world that existed before a great reset, their power lies in the questions they raise. What if human history is not a straight line of progress, but a cycle of rise and catastrophic fall? The stones, real or not, are a permanent monument to that haunting possibility. Carved into a secluded sandstone outcrop north of Sydney, the Gosford Glyphs present a site that feels plucked from the banks of the Nile and dropped into the Australian bush. These weathered inscriptions, numbering in the hundreds, depict figures of Egyptian gods, hieroglyphic symbols, and even what appear to be ancient boats. For those who first documented them in the 20th century, the discovery was electrifying. Here, it seemed, was undeniable proof that ancient Egyptian mariners had navigated their way to the southern continent, leaving a permanent record of their voyage for all to see. Enthusiasts and independent researchers have worked to translate the panels, weaving a dramatic tale of tragedy and exile. The story told by the carvings speaks of two Egyptian princes, sons of Pharaoh Djoser, who were shipwrecked in a strange land. One brother dies and the other, named Nefer-Jeseb, commands that a tomb be constructed for his sibling, carving the story of their journey into the very stone of this foreign landscape. It is a compelling narrative, a human story of loss and remembrance that feels almost too perfect to be coincidence. Yet the response from mainstream Egyptology has been swift and unanimous in its dismissal. Experts point to glaring errors in the glyphs themselves. The symbols are a chaotic mix from different Egyptian time periods, some separated by thousands of years, all jumbled together in a way no literate Egyptian scribe would ever commit. The artistic style is wrong, the grammar is non-existent, and the name of the pharaoh, Djoser, is misspelled. To a trained eye, the glyphs are not a historical document. They are a pastiche, a collection of copied images without any coherent linguistic meaning. So if they are not the work of ancient explorers, what are they? Geological analysis of the site adds another layer of contradiction. Studies of the weathering on the carvings suggest they are not thousands of years old, but perhaps only a few decades. This timeline points squarely to a modern origin. Local lore often fills the gap, with stories circulating about returned World War II servicemen or a passionate local history buff with a book on Egyptology who spent his days carefully etching the symbols into the soft sandstone. The Gosford Glyphs, therefore, occupy a unique and poignant space in this search for connections. They may not be proof of pharaohs in Australia, but they are powerful proof of something else entirely. The enduring, irresistible human urge to see our world as interconnected. They represent a modern mythology carved in stone, a testament to our deep desire to find familiar stories in unfamiliar places, to feel that even the most distant corners of the globe were once touched by the great civilizations of antiquity. The site has become a pilgrimage for those who feel the official story is incomplete. A place where the line between ancient mystery and modern longing beautifully, and perhaps intentionally, blurs. The terracotta head from Calixtlahuoca is far from alone in its silent testimony. Scattered across the Americas, other artifacts whisper of a classical world that feels impossibly connected. In a bay off the coast of Brazil, divers recovered a number of ancient amphorae, those distinctively long, two-handled jars used by Romans to transport wine, oil, and grain across the Mediterranean. Their form is unmistakable, a design perfected for maritime trade. While some argue they could be from a later Portuguese shipwreck, the style and composition of the jars point stubbornly toward a Roman origin. Further north, in a museum in Mexico City, sits a small but striking figurine often called the Roman elephant. Carved from local stone, it depicts an animal with a howdah, the carriage used for riders, on its back. The problem is profound. Elephants were unknown in the pre-Columbian Americas, yet this carving captures the creature with a specificity that feels observational, not imaginary. Could it be a portrayal of a war elephant from the legions of Carthage or Rome, seen by a local artisan and reinterpreted in stone? Each of these objects on its own can be explained away. The amphorae are a misidentification. The elephant is a poorly understood tapir or a modern import. This is the standard scientific process, and it is a necessary one. We must be skeptical. But what happens when we stop looking at these discoveries as isolated puzzles and start viewing them as pieces of a single, vast mosaic? This is the concept of evidence in aggregate. Any one anomaly can be an accident, a hoax, or a mistake. But when dozens, even hundreds of these outliers begin to accumulate from different locations, discovered by different people across different decades, the probability that every single one is wrong begins to shrink dramatically. The weight of the collective evidence becomes heavier than the sum of its individual doubts. It forces us to move from asking, "How can we explain this one thing away?" to asking a far more revolutionary question: what overarching story could possibly connect all of these dots? The most logical yet startling narrative is that the oceans were not the impassable barriers we once believed. Roman ships, whether by deliberate exploration or catastrophic accident, did occasionally reach the shores of the New World. A vessel caught in a storm off the coast of West Africa could have been seized by the powerful Canary Current, a liquid highway that flows directly toward the bulge of Brazil. A disabled ship, its crew clinging to life, would have had no way to fight such a force of nature. Their journey would have been one of desperation, not discovery, ending on a strange and unknown coastline. The survivors, few in number, would have integrated into local societies. Their metal tools would have been prized, their coins curious, their pottery repurposed. Over generations, their stories would have faded into local myth, and their possessions would have been buried in the rituals of their new home. This is not a story of conquest or colonization, but one of chance, survival, and the quiet, almost invisible integration of two worlds. It suggests that our planet was a much smaller place than we ever knew, and that the human spirit of endurance and perhaps a little luck could bridge continents long before the history books decided it was possible. Dighton Rock sits half-submerged in the tidal waters of the Taunton River, a 40-ton sandstone canvas covered in a dense, swirling puzzle of lines, shapes, and faint figures. For centuries, this single rock has been a mirror, reflecting not just one story of the past, but the hopes and theories of everyone who has stood before it. Since colonial times, visitors have peered at its weathered surface and seen exactly what they were looking for. Some early settlers declared the angular markings to be a message from God or a lost tribe of Israel. Later, a passionate theory emerged that the inscriptions were the work of a 15th-century Portuguese explorer, Miguel Corte Real, documenting his presence and claiming the land for his king. The lines were interpreted as his shield, his cross, and his name. Then came the Phoenician theorists who saw ancient Semitic letters hidden within the grooves. More recently, some have even pointed to similarities with ancient Chinese script, tying it back to the voyages of Zheng He. Each generation brings its own lens, its own burning desire to solve the mystery, and the rock obligingly seems to offer a new answer. This is not a case of simple forgery like the Gosford Glyphs, but something far more profound. Dighton Rock is genuinely ancient, its carvings worn by centuries of water and ice. The problem is that the carvings are so abstract, so open to interpretation, that they become a perfect screen for projection. Modern technology has entered the fray with high-resolution, three-dimensional laser scanning, creating a perfect digital model of the rock's surface. Researchers can now peel back the layers of erosion and analyze the precise depth and tool marks of each inscription without the bias of the naked eye. Yet even this objective data has not delivered a single, definitive answer. The scans confirm the carvings are pre-colonial, but their meaning remains locked away. The rock's true power lies in this very ambiguity. It forces us to confront a crucial truth about archaeology itself. The story we tell about the past is never just about the artifacts we dig up. It is equally about us, the storytellers, our cultural biases, our national pride, and our deep need to find our own reflection in the mists of time. We look at a worn inscription and we see explorers, we see pioneers, we see a connection to the great old world civilizations we were taught to revere. We rarely stop to consider that the most likely interpreters, the native peoples who have lived alongside the rock for millennia, have their own rich oral histories about it, stories that often get drowned out by the louder, more sensational theories of outsiders. Dighton Rock is more than a historical puzzle. It is a lesson in humility. It asks us to consider that some ancient messages were never meant for us to decode, and that the most enduring mystery is not who carved the rock, but why we are so desperate to claim its story as our own. A map published in 1558 holds a secret that could redraw the entire age of exploration. The Zeno Map shows the North Atlantic with a detail that seems impossible for its time, depicting Greenland with a shape that matches its actual coastline, and possibly even hinting at the lands we now call North America. Its publisher, a Venetian nobleman named Niccolo Zeno, claimed it was based on the accounts and charts of his ancestors, two brothers who sailed with a Norse prince in the late 14th century. If his story is true, it means that nearly 100 years before Columbus, a detailed cartographic record of the New World existed in Europe, born from Norse voyages that mainstream history has largely forgotten. The map itself is a beautiful and complex artifact, but its origins are shrouded in a fog of accusation and doubt. Almost from the moment it appeared, critics have argued that the Zeno Map is an elaborate 16th century forgery. They suggest that Niccolo Zeno, seeking to glorify his family name, fabricated the entire narrative using new geographic information flooding in from Portuguese and Spanish explorers to create a fictional account of prior discovery. The map's accurate details, they say, are not proof of ancient knowledge, but simply evidence of a clever con artist using the latest intelligence. This is a comfortable, logical explanation that neatly protects the established timeline we all learned in school. Yet, the map contains puzzles that the forgery theory struggles to solve. Its depiction of Greenland, for instance, is remarkably precise, showing it as a single landmass without the icy covering that typically distorted medieval maps. This geographic knowledge was not common in Europe in the 1550s. Even more compelling are the strange place names scattered across its surface. It labels parts of the North Atlantic with names like Estatiland and Drogeo, locations that do not appear on any other contemporary maps, but that bear a striking resemblance to descriptions found in Old Norse sagas. How would a Venetian forger have access to such obscure Scandinavian lore? The most tantalizing possibility is that Zeno was telling the truth. Perhaps his family did possess a chest of old, weathered charts and logs, genuine records from a time when Norse sailors from Greenland and Iceland were still making regular voyages to the North American coast, a secret trade route that collapsed and faded from European memory. The Zeno Map would then be a ghost, a last echo of that lost geographic understanding, published just as a new age of discovery was dawning. This idea forces a profound question upon us. What if Columbus and other explorers were not sailing into a complete void? What if they had access to fragmentary maps, copied and recopied for generations, that preserved whispers of lands across the Western Sea? The Zeno Map sits at the very heart of this mystery, a single piece of parchment that blurs the line between myth and reality. It challenges us to consider that the greatest voyages of discovery may not have been the first, but merely the ones that were finally written down. From the colossal heads of the Olmec to the cryptic glyphs of Australia, these 20 discoveries are not isolated curiosities. Together, they form a mosaic of a world far more vibrant, curious, and connected than our history books ever described. We have journeyed across continents and oceans, following the faint trails left by ancient mariners, traders, and perhaps even lost explorers. Each artifact, from the cocaine in Egyptian mummies to the Polynesian chicken bones in Chile, is a single thread in a vast, interwoven tapestry of human movement and exchange. While healthy skepticism is the bedrock of science, forcing us to question and verify, the sheer weight of this cumulative evidence challenges us to do something equally important: to keep an open mind. The story of humanity is not a sealed book with all its chapters complete. It is a living narrative, a manuscript where new pages are constantly being unearthed from the earth, each one possessing the potential to rewrite the fundamental chapters we thought we knew. So what other connections lie buried, silently waiting for the turn of an archaeologist's trowel or the insight of a curious mind? We would love to hear which of these discoveries you find most compelling. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to continue this incredible journey into the deepest mysteries of our shared past.